good to see familiar faces that haven't seen for a while, and it's good to see faces that are familiar. You can them, but just so glad to see them. I'm not going to say any names, Molly. But it's good to see this morning. A couple things, just so you know, we don't have a lot of children in this church, mostly because of the dynamic that we have. But we do today. We have a baby that is now 3 days old. If you remember Kyle, maybe they just sit over here. They had a little girl named Jordan Lee Ropers, and she's weighed in at 7'7", which I think 7's a lucky number, so I think she's lucky number twice. So she's doing okay. She's been in the NIC unit, the intensive care unit at the hospital, because her lungs weren't totally fully developed, but they got the tubes out and she wants to go home today. So hopefully they'll be here next week. We'll get to see her, and everybody need to pass her around. Just kidding, don't do that. But we're excited about that. So congratulations to Mom and Dad, Kyle and Amy. There was something else I was going to say. I can't remember what it was. Oh, yes. I don't know if you saw this. Somebody just dumped a boatload of cupcakes on the bar. So if everybody would go get 9, then we wouldn't have any left. And then we have donuts too. And I just want you to know I'm going to hit a sugar high in about 10 minutes. So be prepared. And the reason I know I'm going to have a sugar high is because I don't do donuts. I have not had a legitimate donut, I bet you, in 4 or 5 years. And I just had 2. So stay back. I'm kind of excited about that. We're in a series called What I Do When I Drift Away from God, and what we're doing is we're looking at Peter, the disciple Peter, and his life, and the times in his life when he drifted away. And we're looking at snapshots out of his life where Peter makes the wrong choice, his priorities have changed, or he's lost focus, and he spiritually begins to drift. So we're looking at where and why Peter drifted, and then hopefully we're hoping that we can learn from that, not just to catch ourselves drifting, but also to find out what we do when we do drift. We've looked at 3 possible reasons why we might have drifted away. I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you. If it hasn't, then you're probably new in your faith. But we're looking at some reasons why we do drift. We saw 3. The first one is we become spiritually proud. Paul said, don't be so naive and self-confident. You're not exempt. You can fall flat on your face as easily as anyone else. Forget about self-confidence. It's useless. Cultivate God confidence. And we talk about, we get proud to the point where, hey, I'm doing pretty good this faith thing, this walking with Christ thing. I can make it on my own. And basically, we almost say, God, you can have the day off. I got this. And we kind of push God away, and we begin to take the wheel of our life. And it's an issue of pride. We become confident of our ability to live the Christian life in our own strength. We say it's a matter of ego, EGO, edging God out. When we decide to take the wheel of our life, we're essentially pushing God over and out. We said there's another reason we could possibly drift away from God. First of all, being overconfident, and the other one is being overcomfortable, becoming comfortable with where we're at in our walk with God. We become comfortable, we play it cool, we lay back, we essentially fall asleep at the wheel. Again, they happened to Peter. It's right before the Easter story week, and actually the Last Supper has taken place, and Jesus grabs 3 of his inner circle. He says, hey, I need you to go for a walk with me. They go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus says, you 3 stay here and pray. I'm going to go and spend some time alone with the Father. And he says this to them, you must keep awake, keep watch, and pray that you may not come into temptation. He's already told them somebody's going to betray me in this group, and you're all going to desert me. So you need to pray for strength that doesn't happen. And he said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He leaves them to pray. He goes off to pray. He comes back to check on them, and they're all out for the count. They had all fallen asleep. Jesus asked them to come because he thought, hey, these are the guys that will be there for me. They'll have my back. They'll lift me up in prayer. They're out for the count. Jesus says, why couldn't you stay awake for just an hour? We become comfortable. We become lax. If you exercise, hey, you think, well, I'm going to take 2 or 3 weeks off. You'll feel it. If you're a runner and take 2 or 3 weeks off, you're really going to feel it. I have a friend that did coffee with this past week, and he just sits right here. That must have been a good coffee. And Kobe was telling me he ran 2 marathons. Then he didn't run for several weeks. Went and tried to run a couple of miles. He almost died. He can go from 26, he can't run 2. Why? Because your body, you get away from it, and you have that kind of attrition. And it's that way in exercise. It's that way in studies. It's that way in the walk of faith, as we walk with Christ. And so you don't want to fall asleep at the wheel. And thirdly, we saw that when the problems can come in is that we can become more concerned about others think than about what God thinks. And we saw that Jesus was arrested, the disciples fled, the soldiers are now leading Jesus into the city. And if you were on a mountain and you watched this thing take place, they had torches and they went in there. The disciples initially like, oh, we're going to take on these soldiers. And then they thought about, okay, that would not be good. So they did the next best thing. If you've ever seen the Christian movie, it's a classic, Monty Python, The Search for the Holy Grail. They all said, run away! And they did. They blitzed. The crowd ties Jesus up. They lead him into the city. And you would think, where did the disciples go? It's just this group, this mob, the soldiers, they're taking Jesus in. But if you were watching, you would see behind them, 100, 200 yards, keeping a good distance, there's this shadowy figure. And we find out that that's Peter. That Peter initially blitzes, but he comes back and he followed that distance. But another translation says it this way. Peter followed at a safe distance, all the way into the city. He hoped no one would notice. And we said what happened there is just Peter, and he's keeping some serious space between he and Jesus. He didn't want to be identified with Christ. We talked about that whole issue where Scripture says, fearing people and what they think is a dangerous trap. It's a slippery slope. We live to please others. And when we start thinking more about what other people think and what God thinks, we're going to drift every time. Well, this morning I was looking at 4. And we've been looking again at snapshots out of Peter's life. This next snapshot that I want you to zero in occurs shortly after Jesus is arrested. And again, just back into the garden, he's arrested, hands are bound, they turn him around, they're marching him into the city, he's going to be led to Pilate, Pilate's going to defer to the high priest, who will defer back to Pilate, and then he's going to go to the cross. That's where we're at in that narrative. Jesus is making the trip. He said, when would betray me? Judas did. He said, you all desert me, and they have. And Jesus is alone, and he will be alone as he faces his accusers. Jesus is alone, kind of, because we've already said kind of, because Peter is there. Now, again, I want to give Peter some credit here. All the other disciples fled and left. They are gone. They're out of the picture. They're nowhere to be found except for Peter following at this, albeit safe distance. Peter, I think, took off. When this all hit the fan, the other disciples turned tail and ran for the hills. It was every man for himself. And I think Peter sprints. I don't know how far. But all of a sudden it dawns on him. I got to go see what's going to go down. I got to see, I've got to know what's going to happen with Jesus, how this is going to play out. So he turns around, and again, he is the only one. Something within him said, this ain't right, I got to go back. And again, he's playing it safe. So, Jesus is now in the city. I don't know if there's a market square or what have you, but they're in the city. There's a fire going, and Jesus is standing off. If you can imagine, Jesus maybe standing off to the right, maybe up against the wall of a building. There's a couple of soldiers there. They're not worried about Jesus trying to escape. Doesn't seem to be that kind of guy. He kind of went willingly. In fact, he settled things down. Looks like we're going to have some problems, and man, he made sure everybody was at peace. He healed the guy that got cut with a sword. Ain't that good? So Jesus doesn't seem like he's going to blitz. But there's a couple soldiers there just in case. There's not going to be a rescue because they all need chicken. Okay, they're gone. That's not a threat. So they got a couple soldiers over there. Jesus is off to the side. There's this fire in the middle there, the square. And the guards are there. They're not all, in line. They're relaxed, at ease. You got 2 over there by Jesus, a few of them mingling around. I don't know if they're having a cigarette or a drink or a cup of coffee, but they're chatting amongst themselves. And there's a couple that have put by the fire because it's a little bit cool, a little bit nip in the night. But I also want you to know, this isn't just soldiers in this area. There's civilians. If you follow the narrative, you find that out in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They talk about, remember when Peter denies Christ, he's accused by one person, then remember a maidservant, I think a woman, and he denies Christ 3 times. The bottom line is, I want you to see is that this is not just soldiers, it's a mixed gathering of people. Real social diversity around the fire. It's kind of a social gathering point. I live in South Lincoln, and in our neighborhood, it's kind of funny, we have neighbors who have fire pits, one of those mobile units you can move out in your backyard. Our neighbors, for some reason, we have one. We don't do this, but almost all like to move it out into the driveway. Okay, doesn't seem very exciting to me, but that's where they usually put it. And once spring gets warm enough, okay, the fire pits come out. And they'll be out through the spring, all summer, and then into the fall, late fall. And I don't think they take turns on purpose, but they do. Sometimes there'll be two out, but there's these 5, 6, or 7 neighbors who love those things. And once the fire gets stoked up, everybody comes zeroing in. Sometimes, sooner or later, all the neighbors are going to at least stop by, say hi, and they're going to sit and chat. Sometimes my neighbors across the street just did this last week. They had relatives over. I don't know if somebody got hitched, buried, or married, or what have you. Didn't seem to be a down crowd, so of course it could be half the crowd for the rich relative and nobody cared about, not at all blessed. But we'd be off to Disney with my family. But anyway, they were out there gathering, and then all the neighbors made their way over to the fire. It's kind of a social gathering point, and that's what this is in this scene. All right, so I want you to get that scene. And Peter is off in the shadows. I don't know if he's around the corner. I don't know if he climbed up in the tree, to get a glimpse of what's going on. But Peter has taken his time, and now he's kind of coming into the crowd incognito. He's given enough time so it's not obvious that he followed him from the garden. He doesn't want anybody to take notice of him. He's kind of laying low. I don't know what he's up to, but he wants to know what's going to go down. He wants to know what's happening with Jesus. So Jesus is not totally alone. But we know that Jesus knows that he is there. There's a dialogue that takes place later in the narrative. I don't know what he's doing. He's trying to catch wind, hear some chatter. But he wants to know what's happening and going to happen. So here's what happens. After a while, Peter kind of walks over in between some of these soldiers and starts warming his hands by the fire. And again, it's not like he's the only civilian, so this is a crowd of people. But he's kind of, people sit down, I was watching another Christian movie last night with John Wayne, and there's this scene where Dean Martin, he's also in this movie, and he's kind of making it really obvious. Somebody look at you go like this, you're like, wow, what are you doing? But he's not doing that. He's just kind of playing it cool, not trying to draw attention to himself. And here's Peter, hanging with the people. Essentially, we're going to take the life of Jesus. And he's blending in, if you please, with the bad guys. It's like there's been this line drawn in the sand, and Peter is on the wrong side of the line. He's blending in and trying to identify with everybody else in this crowd except the one that he said, I will never betray you. And there's something wrong with that picture, don't you think? It was just hours earlier, remember in this dialogue, Jesus says, one of you will betray me, and Peter stands up and self-righteously says, oh, he might betray you and she might betray you, not me, because they're not as committed, they're not as strong as I. Their heart's not in it. They don't love you as much as I love you, but those guys, they may all betray you, but I'm in there. I'm there for you, Jesus. I got you. I got your back. Remember that? And then Jesus says, I don't know what's going to betray me, but you all can desert me. Now he's really irritated. He's saying, no, I will never desert you. Jesus says, before the cock crows twice, or deny me 3 times. And Peter says, never. That's never going to happen. Not me, nada. In fact, he says this, if I have to die for you, it's a classic line. It'll be you and me, Jesus. We'll go down together. Okay? And you know what happens. How does Peter go from making this grandiose confession of faith, his commitment, how does he go, and in just a matter of hours, laying low? There's a couple things that I see here. We're going to look at one today, and it's not technically in the text, so I apologize for it. But you can see why I'm putting this in, and then next week it'll make sense why I did it in this order. But here's the deal. Peter has drifted, and I think you're going to understand and see how easy it is for us to drift, especially in this area. And I'm going to put it in the first person, and that is this: I drift. And you need to ask yourself, do I drift because of this? Okay, I want you to be able to say to yourself, could this be me? Could this happen to me? And if it is, and I own it, What do I need to do about it? Because the fourth reason that we begin to drift is this. It's when we're distracted by the things of this world. We get distracted by the things of this world. When we focus on the world and the things of the world, this world, I just want you to know our faith is going to go south. It's going to go south. There's this parable that I like. It doesn't mean much to you, but back in 1979, I went to this church, and we visited this church in a little town called Lamar's. Lamar's Island. You might not be familiar with it, but you probably know Blue Bunny Ice Cream, because that's what it's named. And we were going to college here. We made our way to this church, went to this church, and the pastor on that Sunday preached James chapter 3. Okay? And then from there he shifted over and tied in the parable of the sower. Now, you know the parable of the sower. The parable of the sower, Jesus gets up and says this man went out to plant his field. And he threw the seed out, and some of it fell in the pathway. And the birds of the air came down and ate that seed. And it was gone. And some of the seed fell on rocky soil. And those plants sprung up quickly. But when the sun came out and the heat came on, those little plants had no root. And they dried up. And they died. Some of the seed fell among thorns, and they grew up with the thorns. But over time, the thorns choked out those little plants, and they did not produce. And then there was a fourth soil, the good soil. Some of the seed fell upon the good soil. Those plants grew up, and they produced 30 times of what was sown. And the whole point of that parable is saying people respond to me differently. Some don't respond to me at all, like the birds on the path. Some respond and they're all excited, but when the pressure comes on, and we talked about that last week, when you get that pressure, and you start worrying about what other people think, and you're worried about what it might cost you, they bail. The one I want to focus in on is the thorns. And this is what it says about the thorns. One translation reads this way: the seed cast in the weeds, or thorns, is the person who hears the kingdom and news, but weeds, thorns, and worry and illusions about getting more, and wanting everything under the sun, strangle what was heard, and nothing comes out of it. I just want to focus on it just for a couple minutes. Years ago, I had a friend, and this friend was older than I, not old enough to be my dad, but about 10 years my senior. Very, very sharp guy, and he ended up being a very incredible inspiration to me at a critical point in my life. He was this eternal optimist. For this guy, the cup was always full and overflowing. It was always half full, but for him it was always overflowing. He believed the best in people. If you said something negative, you'd counter it with something good about that individual. All right? He was growing in his faith. He was kind of a new Christian, maybe about a year. He was reading Christian classics. C.S. Lewis, for example, Augustine, all those. And he would not just read them, he'd remember them, and then he would share with you, this is what I've learned today. I mean, he did it almost every day. He either had a quote, a thought, a verse to share. I mean, he was excited. And so he was also studying his Bible, and he was applying what he learned. He was one of those guys that when he saw you, boom, his hand was out to shake yours. He was quicker still with a smile, and quicker with even still with an encouraging word. He had a great belly laugh. He loved life. If you were in the crowd and you heard and he laughed, you knew exactly where he was at. And people were attracted to him like a magnet. He just was that kind of guy. And so we started spending time together. We met almost every week. And he called me one day and said, "Ray, I need to do dinner. It needs to be a long dinner. I've got something I'm going to invite you," which was interesting. And so we ended up having lunch, and he started telling me that he had just become a part of this company. And he got on the ground level of this company, the inner circle, the 2 or 3 guys who made the initial investments. And it was starting to take off. And he goes, I have made some serious money in the last 12 months. Near $500,000. I could make ends meet with $500,000. I'd even tithe 50%, because that's the kind of guy. Anyway, he made $500,000 kind of quickly. He said, "Ray," he said, "that's not even serious money. We have some ventures out there right now that I could easily, in the next year, double my investment. In the next year or two." And I have to be honest, I was kind of happy for him. I want to say you've always been like a brother to me, a father to me. Will you marry me? That kind of thing. I was a little jealous, actually. Okay? But he's such a great guy. I was really happy for him because he had worked hard. And he said this, and I wrote this down years ago when we had this conversation. He said, "I got into this business, right, so I can make money. But now I want to make a lot of money, and I want to reinvest it so I can retire early and then just do ministry with no strings attached." He said, I can't believe how much I've made. It's more than I've ever dreamed, but a little bit longer and I can double my investment. And then I'll be free to do things for God and to help people. That is a great aspiration. I mean, I would love to be in that place. Okay? But then there was this pause. You ever had somebody pause in a conversation with you and you realize something a little heavier? They want to make sure you hear what they're going to say. They want to make sure to say it. This is what he said. He said, Greg, but the whole thing is just so intoxicating. I like money, and I know I like the things that money can buy. And the places I can go and the things I can do. I like the freedom it will give me. But listen to this next line. Greg, I'm just afraid that what might happen is this. I will trade my relationship with God for the dollar. In less than a year, his investment doubled. He's still in that business, and it has doubled several times since then. Okay? But here's what I just want you to catch, and I really like this guy. Okay? But we don't talk about him. This was right, he made a trade. He drifted. In fact, he pretty much fell off the map. And he has not recovered. He is no longer believes the best in people. He always believes that people are trying to get something from him or take advantage of him. He is cynical about life and faith and family and friendship. He has the fewest friends he's ever had in his entire life. I think his circle is probably less than 5. He has an ego that has done irreparable damage. Now, somebody, if you're here, you go, God can fix everything, and you need to wake up, okay? Because I'm just telling you, God can fix everything, but that requires other people to be willing to, and there are things here that cannot be fixed. In his family, the church will never recover from the damage and the splits that occurred there. Because he got in and started running the church like he did his company. And in his company, people are expendable to his agenda. And there's been a lot of people basically hurt. And his family is not going to recover. In his work, the people he works with, I've had friends who worked in that company that said he was such a delight. There are people, those people avoid him. Many have actually left the company. And their work continues to occur. Now, here's what I want you to know. And I want to put this out. There is nothing wrong with being successful. There really isn't. In fact, if you study Scripture, when Jesus talks about money, he talks, you know that it says money is the root of all evil. The bottom line is money is an object that is neutral. Okay, what you said, it's neutral, but it has this capacity to be intoxicating. It has this capacity to be addicted. Do you remember another Christian movie? If you're here, I call it a movie Christian. But Fiddler on the Roof from Tevye says, he said, the money is the root of all evil. He said, may God smite me with it, man never recover. Okay, so I think most of us are there. Okay, and how much is enough? A little bit more. Okay, so it's a drug. Okay, it has that capacity. There's nothing wrong with having and developing and using your gifts and abilities to do well. The problem is trying to keep that in check. It is really hard to keep that in check. But here's the scoop. It's not just money. When I talk about the things in the world, I'm not going to talk about just money. Okay? It's what you say. There are a ton of things in life, in the world, that are intoxicating, that are a draw. So see if you don't resonate, I don't resonate with money. Okay? But no. I wish that was my burden. It's not. Okay? But try some of these. How about fame? I'm going to stop at some of these. It's not my notes. Fame. There was a gentleman that was in my life that I wasn't a good friend of his, but I got to meet him, and he was one of my heroes. And he got some fame because of some abilities he had. But those abilities, because of time, are short-lived. And when the fame that his abilities got no longer were bringing the goods, he took a 12-gauge shotgun right here, and he only needed one shot because he could not get the drug anymore that gave his life meaning. All right? Image. Had a conversation in the last 24 hours with an individual who's a good friend of mine, and they put a picture on the communicated that there was this great relationship between them and their spouse. So I wrote them a note and asked them, hey, it looks like you guys are getting along together. But it was an image shot. And this person hates that. So I just happened to remind him that I thought that was probably true, but we were communicating this image to make peace with a few people in the family because things aren't good there. Does that make sense? Reputation. A person. Boy, folks, if I had $1 for every person I've known that has chucked their faith for another individual, a significant other, a man or a woman, or you know what I'm saying? I love them. I know they don't know Christ. I know they don't have a heart for God, but I love them. And then what happens is they begin to gradual drift and find themselves in an unhappy marriage. Okay? Scott and Ann do a lot of the counsel for young couples, and maybe we should try to nail that. That's one of our priorities, to make sure they're on the same page spiritually. Because life happens. It doesn't quite say that on the hand, but I think you get the idea. Life happens. And if your relationship isn't built on anything else but Christ, it's going to be shaky. It's hard with Christ. I think sometimes it's impossible without. Okay? Pleasure. I want what I want when I want it. Popularity, position, power, stuff, success, things. And that's just a short list. There's only, and I want you to know, these things are good things. I want you to catch that. These things are good things. These things, if you have any of those things, more, I don't say power, because that's one of them, but cool. Those things are neutral. But they have that tendency to dictate us. Do you ever get one of those things where you have a want, and then there's nothing wrong with wants, but do you know what marketing does? They turn that want into a need. It's not that I want that, I need that, which shifts over to I have got to have that. And then beyond that, a lot of times, whatever it takes to get what I now deserve. It went from a want to a need to a have, and I deserve. And I have every right to do what I want to get. These are good things that have that tendency. A wise man once said to his son these words. He said, your son, your difficulty son in life, will not be separating the good from the bad, but the best from the good. And that's what we got to be really careful here with. To choose what is best and not what is good. And then not to let this thing, what was a want that became a need, that became a have, because what happens when we get to that point, then it consumes us. And then it defines us. And it certainly distracts us. And it distracts us from the things that count, does it not? Faith, family, and friends. The things that matter most. So here's the closing question. There's a couple of here. Number one, have you drifted? Are you in a drift? I had a guy tell me recently, he's in this room, we haven't gotten together yet, so it's not totally. But I love his honesty. So we got to get together for coffee or something because I drifted. And it was so refreshing to hear that. He wasn't being, trying to be, it wasn't a negative beat on me. It's, I drifted. For 3 years as your pastor, I drifted. Okay? I've been fighting, just so you know, being real, some of your guests, goodbye, but just being real, I've been fighting a drift, and next week is going to be a little confession time, because when I tell you what has caused me to drift, almost all of you, some of you deeply are getting that. It's going to resonate with where you're at right now. It's going to be a little painful, as it will be for me to share mine. And it's just so easy to drift, and sometimes it catches us when we didn't see it coming, but it was gradual. I've had a conversation at lunch this past week with a really good friend. Hoping that you saw him, with several people this week, so take a pic. And we were talking about his marriage that had failed, and it caught him off guard. It was devastating for him. But then he said, now, in retrospect, I look back at it, and I just can't believe I didn't see it. We had for years drifted apart, and I just didn't see it because I was so distracted by all the other things that we were doing in life. And now I look back on it and said, I don't blame them or her. I blame myself too because I was part of that drift. But I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't set out for it to happen. And neither did she, but this is where it ended up. And it does that in our spiritual walk with God. We don't mean for it to happen. It just does because we neglect it. So having drifted, has something gotten in the way so you lost focus, maybe you lost sight? I mean, just be really careful here about Jesus. Do you find yourself like Peter, warming your hands by the fire, and you see in the corner of your eye, Jesus is over there? You see what I'm saying? And you're like, how did I get here? I wonder where Peter was at. I wonder if Peter do you ever have that deja vu when you realize, how in the fat jack did I get here? That awareness that, what am I doing here? And then you're warming yourself on the fire, and there's a numbness there. I think that's what's happened with Peter. And we're going to see this next week. Magnified. Jesus was riding this wave of popularity. He just came into Jerusalem, the hallmark, the centerpiece, the national shrine of the Jewish people. There was talk he might be the Messiah. He's doing miracles. The crowd is going. He's got all these good things happening. What just happened in the garden? And Jesus told him. In fact, he told Peter, I'm going to be betrayed and crucified. And Peter said, no, it's not going to happen to you. I know what's best for you, Jesus. Okay, you always know you're in trouble with tell Jesus, I know what's best. So he's been before. Can you imagine the numbness? And I was just with him praying in the last hour. I just had the Last Supper with him. I told him, and I'm warming my hands by the fire. Here's the $1 million question. What's the one thing that you know God wants you to do that keeps you procrastinating? That's the hard question. You need to say, what's the one thing I know I need to do? I have got to move off dead center. Psalms 139, you know the verse. Search me, O God, know my anxious thoughts. See if there be any offensive way in me and lead me in the way to everlasting. That's the question we got to ask ourselves. We don't like those kind of hard checks. Because if we're really honest, sometimes the answer we get back is, there's a problem. You've got a tumor. You need surgery. You need to slow down. You need to stop. You need to step back. And we feel that gnawing sometimes. Holy Spirit from God, but we keep going 100 miles an hour. But we know that there's this distance. And we can see Jesus off in the corner. And we know that's where we should be, not by the fire. Let's pray. Father, I know from personal experience that there are people in this room right now who know that they've drifted. And if it's not just they've drifted, they're drifting. And for whatever reason, maybe they're a little bit numb, they're tired, they don't know how they ended up here, they know things aren't right, they know there have been times when they have been closer to Jesus than they've ever been, but it's not now. And that connection that they once had isn't there, and they're not sure why. And it's not because we were mean or we chose to go there, just made an executive decision. I think I'm going to walk away from Jesus, but it's happened. One choice at a time, one decision at a time, one day at a time, and the cumulative effect is we feel distance. And we're busy, and we're tired, and we don't even know if we have energy to turn this ship around. There are people here right now who know what the right thing is to do, and they are at battle right now with their minds. Because maybe this thing that is distracting them is a good thing, but not just a good thing, a thing that's given them some meaning and purpose. Maybe it's shallow, but it feels good. Maybe it's wrong, but it feels right. So God, I pray that you give them the strength to just stop and to turn around, to come home to grace. And I pray, God, that you help us to experience the freedom of restoring grace. And to know that if we sense that, that comes from you as well. And maybe you need to pray some prayer just like this today. God, I'm putting my faith and my trust in you right now. Forgive me for drifting because I've drifted. It's my fault. Forgive me for the wrong choices I've made if there's been wrong choices. Forgive me for choosing other things and stuff over you and whatever that might be. Forgive me for the drifting that's happened in my life and show me how to live this week. God, the best I know how, I want to come to you. I want that relationship, that connectedness, because I know when I'm connected to you, I experience life as it was meant to be lived. So, Father, I just ask you to do this for me. Help me with this commitment. Give me the strength to follow through. And pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Please stand with me as we close with these last couple songs. Father, you work others.